Ken Humphrey, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Thanks for having me, Patrick.
You betcha. I'm going to start out with back in 2023, you got a very special Christmas present from the state of Wisconsin. Tell us about that.
I did. I got my first jury summons from the state of Wisconsin telling me I needed to report in the first week of January, right after New Year's.
Oh man. Now, this is your first time being on a jury. Did you have any family members or anything like that that are you're like close people that you kind of had an idea what happens when you're, called to jury duty?
Yeah, my wife had served on a jury trial probably 2 or 3 years earlier. I
Okay.
think hers lasted about a week or so. So I knew roughly kind of what to expect.
Okay. So what were you feeling like when you got it? Was it dread, excitement, fear of the unknown? I mean, what did it look like to
Actually,
you?
Actually, I was a little, probably more anticipation and excitement than dread. I'd
Okay.
never served on a jury. The only other summons I'd gotten in my life was when I was away at college and couldn't serve. So this is my first chance to do it. And yeah, so I think there's a certain amount of anticipation. I will say I was looking forward to it just for the experience.
Okay, gotcha. Now, what were you doing for a living back then?
At that point in time, I was working for a company called Abbott Laboratories as an IT program manager. So I had a full-time white-collar desk job.
So, do they have like a policy? Would they like pay you or be cool about you taking that time if it did, come down to that?
Yes, they're fine. They actually had an established policy on what to do for time away involving things like jury duty. And so, yeah, it was fine. I was
Yeah,
able to
because
take that time
for
away.
some people that can be a financial hardship, because you don't know how long you're going to be gone.
Yeah.
And that could have a real effect if you're the breadwinner, in a family and or it's just you, that could really throw a wrench into things.
Now, there's a lot of people that just have hourly jobs, right?
Right.
Regular hourly jobs, and you can't just disappear
Yeah.
and still
Yeah.
get paid.
Yeah, exactly. And when you jury duty in Wisconsin, was it 16 bucks a day?
16 bucks a day, but no food.
Did they feed you?
They threw a pizza towards us once or twice, but for the most part, no.
Wow. See, I interned with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department back in 86 when I was in college. Yes, I'm old.
Hmm.
And part of my internship was working with the bailiffs. I was on the road, I was at the airport, and it was county stadium back then, and it was the sheriffs that did the county stadium, the security for that. And I thought it was a great job. And I'm in with the bailiffs, and they had a couple of sequestered juries, and the bailiffs loved it because a ton of overtime. They're just babysitting these jurors,
Yep.
and they had their own chefs. They had their own cooks that would cook all their meals for them, for the jurors.
Nice.
Yeah, and the food was great. Oh my God, I'm a starving college kid, and I'm just like, man, I'm living high on the hog because they'd always throw a plate my way, and I'm just like, yeah, thank you.
You're government in action. You're
Yeah,
welcome.
exactly. I don't think they do that anymore, but it was great
They,
back then.
they certainly
But
did not for us.
so before this trial, what was your experience with the criminal justice system?
So thankfully, very little on the other side of it, right? It's
Okay.
some of the usual hijinks when I was young, but I really didn't have much experience going through the system. And I'll chat about it later. I did have experience in courtrooms, but it wasn't anything with the jury.
Okay. So did you watch a lot of Law and Order or anything like that?
A lot of the books I've read in the past, I'm not a
Okay.
big TV watcher, but a lot of the books I've read in the past had, centered a lot around legal thrillers.
Okay, very good. So you actually wound up being the jury foreman, you
Yeah.
know, before the Jensen trial. Did you know anyone or have this any idea what this job was or have a grasp of what it meant?
No. I mean, and again, my exposure to that came, in movies or through books where, they went through this formal process and the foreman was, the leader of the group and kept everybody in line and,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. And that is not what it ended up being.
Okay. So could you explain to us, did you get elected, appointed, voluntold? I mean, how did that work?
So on the closing arguments on the last day in the back room, us and the jury are like, all right, well, the judge will tell us what to do. He'll tell us how to elect the foreman. He'll tell us kind of how we go about deliberations. That was our assumption, right, as part of the instructions.
Yeah.
He did not. He said, all right, he went through his whole spiel. You're free to return to elect your foreman and begin your deliberations. And we got back to the room, and I think we all kind of looked at each other and it's like, that's it?
Yeah.
Right? All right. And so it was kind of that awkward moment. You've had this before in social settings where somebody wants to say something or they want to raise their hand and say, I'll
Right.
do it, I'll do it. But others are like, I don't want anything to do with it. So a couple of people said, "Oh, you know what? I can be foreman if nobody else wants to do it." Right? Kind of that bit of
Yeah.
that passive aggressive approach. And one of the other jurors like, "Well, I think Ken should be our foreman." And
How
a
did
few
Ken
other
feel
jurors
about
like, "Yep, I agree, I agree."
that?
And so suddenly I'm standing looking around and I said, "All right, well, I guess here we are."
Yeah. So you didn't know this until the trial was pretty much over with and you had to do your deliberations. You said that was after closing arguments, right?
Correct, yeah. I mean, there's no jury foreman role the entire way through. Not until the last 2 days when we deliberated.
Wow. That's
When
yeah.
I watch it, you watch it in movies, and the juror and the foreman selected the first day, like I
Yeah.
said, and he's the one that runs the show. But no, that's not how it was for us.
Wow. Can you kind of give us an outline of the crime and why you were there for the second trial, correct?
Correct. So the outline of the crime in the broad strokes is in 1998. Mark Jensen of Kenosha, Wisconsin, was accused of poisoning his wife using antifreeze. And the first trial wrapped up somewhere, I believe, around 2008. And he was sentenced, I believe, to life in prison.
Okay.
From what I understand, is that the Wisconsin Supreme Court took this case up on appeal and found that the prosecution had used a piece of evidence that should not have been allowed to be used. And in specific, it was a letter that the wife had written prior to her death and put in a sealed envelope and gave to a neighbor that essentially said, if I die, if I'm found dead, look at my husband. I suspect him.
Oh,
So it
wow.
was literally a letter from the grave, but the
Yeah.
Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled that that should not have been allowed as part of the trial proceedings under, I think it's the constitutional clause to face your accuser, that type of thing.
Wow.
And he wasn't able to face her because she was dead.
Dang.
And so they vacated the verdict. And that's when it came back around again in 2023, for which I was in that trial.
Dang. So was the first trial as long as the second trial? Because
The first trial was 7 weeks, which at
oh,
that time, and it may still hold that record as the longest trial in Wisconsin state history.
dang. Yeah, that's longer than Dahmer. That's longer than yeah.
Yep.
Wowzers.
Ours lasted 4 weeks. I mean, on the second go round, all the same witnesses, same prosecutor, different defense team, but we still got 4 weeks out of the second go around. A lot of that, I think, was the amount of evidence and the witnesses. I think there were 20, or I'm sorry, 90 witnesses queued up
Okay.
for us. I think we got through most of them. And just a slew of evidence, digital evidence and
Hmm.
physical evidence. And so I think that's really what added up to, the length of time for this.
Yeah, so that's the second trial. Now, how many witnesses like couldn't show up because either they moved out of state or somebody died or did
Um,
any of that happen?
I think there were three or four where, yes, they had passed away. And
Okay.
so we actually watched video testimony
Ah, so they
of them
allowed that,
from
huh?
the
From
from
the
the
first trial?
first trial. Yes.
Oh, okay.
And if you think listening to a witness, watching them live, listening to them live, testifying something it can be, hard to do, wait till you watch 3 hours of scratchy videotape
Oh,
from, 1999 or from 2004 or whatever, and
yeah.
just sitting there and watching that. I mean, that was a little rough getting through
Oh,
some of those
I
testimonies.
I can only imagine. Holy cow. So, yeah, the accused Mark Jensen, they said that he was slowly poisoning his wife Julie with antifreeze.
Yes.
And, you know, this perked my ears up because I responded to a suicide one time where this woman, I mean, she had a very nice car. She had a Mercedes, and it's parked in this just total flea bag motel by the airport. And we're like, okay. And the maid called and said, yeah, we found this body. And I was like, okay. And we found empty antifreeze bottles and Gatorade. She was mixing it with Gatorade. And there was a
Hmm.
suicide note. Her husband left her, et cetera, et cetera. The medical examiner the ME's office came out, and the investigator was one of my personal favorites. Her name was Jenny Penn. She was just a rock star. She was so good at what she did. And she looked at me and she's like, "That's one hell of a way to go." And I said,
Yeah.
"Really?" Because she'd been doing this forever. And she said, "Your organs start like shutting down." And she said, "It's so painful.
Yep.
It's excruciatingly painful. Why somebody would try to kill themselves this way." She says, I have no idea why, but she was suffering. She would have to suffer for quite some time.
Yes. That's one thing that we learned. Obviously, I wasn't real well versed on the effects of antifreeze on a human body,
Yeah.
but one of the things that we had learned is A, it doesn't take that much, and B, yes, there's excruciating pain at the end, but initially you get the sensation of being drunk, right?
Wow.
And if it continues on, that seems like, oh, that's not so bad. But by the time you get to the excruciating pain part of your organs shutting down, it's too late, right? I mean,
Yeah.
at that point, there's no way out, and
Oh,
there's
oh,
nothing you
oh.
can do for that. So yes, nasty way to go.
Yeah. And I think also, I watched old YouTube videos of the trial, and I believe her face was a little bit contorted, and there was evidence of suffocation as
Hmm.
well.
Yes, there was. One of the pictures that we had viewed was taken of her right, at the crime scene as they pulled her head up from the pillow, and you can kind of see how her nose was pushed off to one
Hmm.
side, and there was some slight evidence of petechiae, like on the lungs
Oh,
and that thing.
yeah.
There wasn't, strangle marks around her throat. There wasn't any outward um, physical signs of strangulation or suffocation, but it did show on, signs on the lungs and that of suffocation in the form of petechiae.
So she wasn't dying fast enough for her husband.
That was a theory, right? That, oh, the kids are gonna be home. She wasn't dying fast enough. I've got to speed this along,
Wow,
and pushed her head into the pillow. It was the way the prosecution framed it.
man. So was it hard being impartial?
Um, yeah, sure. And there's always your own personal biases, right? You
Right.
bring into stuff,
You're a
right?
human, right?
Right. We're human. For one, I was fascinated by the antifreeze aspect of it. It's not something that I'd ever really knew about or considered.
Sure.
Um, but in terms of the impartiality, I think my primary thought, after we listened to the opening arguments, was that, man, the defense has got a lot of work to do to overcome what the prosecution's bringing to the table, right? The prosecution's got witnesses, they've got digital evidence, they've got testimony, they had a lot in their holster. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And then the defense walks up and is like, well, no, they're wrong. She was depressed and committed suicide. And I
Okay.
remember thinking, wait, that's it? That's what they're going with? Like, and so, you know, you strive to remain impartial, but the initial thought is, man, this is going to be a tough role for the defense to hold because, they just didn't seem to have much evidence on their side to counteract what the prosecution had.
Yeah, I took one look at this guy, Mark Jensen. Like I said, I was, checking YouTube videos and all that stuff. And to
Hmm.
me, it looked like he had all the personality of a cold fish. I mean, I had no problem believing he could kill somebody. It wasn't like, "Oh my God, I can't believe he's a killer." And I'm like,
Right.
"No, oh yeah, I could totally believe he is."
Yeah, this is one of the probably unheralded aspects of being in a jury is the way that the attorneys and the accused just sort of size you up. They stare at you like you're mannequins behind a window, like you're not really humans. And so he'd just be staring at us as,
Yeah.
testimony's going on, probably watching for our reactions, seems there's any hint of anything that might, you know, reveal how we think about it. But it's really unnerving, and especially this guy, kind of the way he looked, the way he
Yes.
looked at us. It's a little unnerving when you're just sitting there and you can't do anything but avoid eye contact. So,
Well, obviously the defense attorney and the prosecutor, they play to the jury.
yep.
That's a part of their shtick. There's
Hmm.
going to be some dramatic stuff. Some of it's over the top. It depends on what your personality is and how you conduct yourself in a courtroom.
Yep.
Uh, you know, I just remember one time I was in a homicide trial. I was up on the stand for hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, and I was just getting roasted. and the defense attorney was so good. It was Roger Kohler. I'll never forget him. He was like Columbo. He wasn't argumentative. He wasn't, but he'd be like, one more thing. And I'm like, oh,
Mm,
for God's sakes, can't this shit be over with? And I'm just, and he had me sweating. I mean, his client still wound up was found guilty. It was a very different kind of homicide, but there's news cameras. I mean, that's nerve wracking.
hmm.
So as far as a juror goes, I mean, how much of that did you like pick up on? Like, okay, this is a little bit over the top. This prosecutor, this defense attorney is, they're putting on an act for me right
Yeah, with the prosecutor, it was easy because he absolutely was very theatrical
now. Yeah.
about things. He would get, confrontational with witnesses. He would, get bombastic at times and blow up his voice and make all these motions and get red in the face. And then
Yep.
he'd drop his voice really low and try and make a point. And so, yeah, we had more than a few discussions in the back room about, the prosecutor and just his one man show that he's putting on for us. I think the defense attorneys are, probably more straightforward.
Okay.
That they just kind of you could see kind of how they'd react, and then you get a little snippy towards the prosecution, but they in no way were leveling up with him in terms of the drama that they wanted to bring to the table.
Sure. Now, as far I guess I should backtrack a little bit. Like, what did your like normal day look like as a juror on that trial?
So the idea of jury duty, can be kind of exciting to think about. It's like, oh, we're going to hear all this evidence and we're going to,
Yeah.
the fate of a man is in our hands and yada, yada, yada. The reality is it's actually pretty monotonous and repetitive. Be there by, we had to be there by about 8:15 because court started at 8:30.
Yep.
We had a judge that declared to us on the first day, court will never run past 5 o'clock. I got two dogs to feed, so we will be done at 5 every day. So, but in between then, it was literally you show up, you walk in, you sit there, you take your notes, get sent out for break or for whatever an aside, lunch, and then just rinse and repeat. And so it did become quite a blur, especially for 4 weeks. I mean, you're just getting hammered over the head with witness testimony and evidence. And a lot of times, and you're probably aware of this, having been around the system, that a lot of times the witnesses will say the same thing.
Sure.
You get multiple witnesses that
Yep.
kind of attest to the same viewpoint, the same perspective. It's like, well, how many times can I hear people tell me essentially the same thing in different
Right.
words? And so, from that aspect, it's like, wow, this is not what I thought it would be, right? It's nowhere near as exciting as it's portrayed. It is a lot of just rinse and repeat.
Yeah, that would get to be old after a while. And you were not sequestered, correct?
We were not sequestered, so yes, we were allowed to go home every night and didn't have to stay over the weekends.
That's so
Thank God.
nice. Yeah, that's awesome because I mean, I can't even imagine. Look at the OJ trial. A whole
Yeah,
year of going
yeah.
that poor jury. I think they for as far as OJ went, I think they were just finally like, just let's just pick a verdict. Let's just get this shit over with. It's and
Yeah.
Ito, I mean, nobody's perfect, but that judge I didn't think did a very good job. It's hindsight. It should never have dragged
Mhm.
on that long at
Yeah.
all.
And I mean, you're only human. After a while, you're ground down. You're just like, I just want this to be over.
Yep,
And I'm sure there's a lot of jurors who are like, let's just, yeah, get the vote, get the verdict so we can all go back to our lives, especially
exactly.
in longer trials.
Now, the purpose of sequestered is, you're kind of cut off from the outside world, so nothing's going to influence your decision.
Hmm.
Obviously, the judge will give you instructions, I'm guessing, that it's like, no social media for you, no
Yep.
TV, no radio. Don't talk about this with your significant other.
Correct. I mean, his was pretty much circumspect to say, don't read the news about this trial, don't look on the internet, yeah, don't discuss this with any of your friends or family. And, it was actually that part was pretty easy for me because my wife watched the trial every day on YouTube on Court TV. So
Okay.
she knew exactly what was happening, but would never ever tell me what, like when we get sent out of the courtroom because the lawyers are arguing, she would never discuss what they said, even though she
Oh,
knew.
wow.
I mean,
Yeah.
she knew what that, the missing evidence, or not missing, the evidence that was not allowed to be presented this time. She knew exactly what that
Sure.
was. Whereas me, on the first day, when they said, this is the trial of Mark Jensen, who's accused of poisoning his wife with antifreeze, my first thought was, wait a minute, didn't we have this happen already once in Kenosha? Because I vaguely remembered reading about it, and I didn't realize I
Mm.
was reading about Mark Jensen's original trial. I didn't remember
Okay.
that that's what it was. Whereas my wife,
Yeah.
she knew when I was going in that day that that was one of the trials on the docket that I could possibly be a juror for. Because when I came home and said, man, there were people everywhere in there. Like there were hundreds of people. She knew why. She knew that there'd be a lot of dropouts and that was a big case. Where I'm just like,
Right.
do they always have this many? So I was pretty
Yeah.
clueless.
So, the burden of proof is on the DA. You're innocent till proven guilty, and it
Mhm.
has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Did the DA do a good job of prosecuting this crime, do you think?
I do. If you set aside the theatrics and the
Hmm.
drama that he brought, there was just this overwhelming amount of evidence, and he was very, he just picked apart all the evidence and all the witnesses in a manner that kind of made it clear that yeah, they aren't adding a lot to the defense, or they have added a lot to the prosecution's
Okay.
standard. So I think overall he did a pretty good job. And I should mention he was the DA on the first trial, and had since retired from Kenosha County and was a special prosecutor somewhere else in Wisconsin and came back for
Oh,
this
no
trial.
kidding.
Yeah, I don't know if it was because they asked the current DA asked him, or if he said, "I nope, I want to close this loop and make sure this guy, stays
Oh,
in
so,
jail."
most trials, the DA doesn't do the prosecuting. Their
Right?
assistant district attorneys or maybe a deputy district attorney. Was it the DA from back then, or was it an
No,
ADA?
no, he had his co-chair was an assistant district attorney
Okay.
for Kenosha County, but yeah, back on the initial one, I think he was the actual DA, and he
Wow.
actually did prosecute it the first time around.
I'll be danged. Yeah, because like, coming from Milwaukee, we had a zillion, ADAs, and
Right?
the DA rarely would prosecute anything. It was before the guy that's in there now prosecute him and a couple of other ADAs. Some of his underlings prosecuted a case, and he just was a buffoon. He looked terrible. You could tell
Yeah,
he wasn't in a courtroom for a long time, and he was just
yeah.
tripping over his own words. And it was the Frank Jude case.
Hmm.
And they they failed to meet their burden of proof. And those three cops that got arrested, I mean, they later got prosecuted under federal crimes, but state crimes, they did a terrible job. I remember watching it on TV, and I'm like, oh my God, you're doing a really bad job here. And everybody, I'm
Yeah.
there with a bunch of other cops, and they're like, this guy sucks. And he's our DA. Holy shit. Yeah, it was E. Michael McCann. That's what it was. And we're
Okay.
all like, any jury could not find these guys guilty because he's not doing his job right. You know,
Right.
we're all like, okay, well,
Yeah.
whatever. So, according to the prosecution, what was the motive for the defendant to want to kill his wife? They don't have to prove motive, but it's good
Right.
to have it.
Right. So there was probably two-pronged approach on the motive. One, it was revealed that the wife Julie had had an affair in the early 90s, like a weekend affair, which she immediately regretted, and confessed to Mark, but that he held against her for years and was actually, engaging in harassment of her with, over this affair. Like he would leave explicit photos printed on paper around the house, right, or out in
Oh,
the
yeah,
and just
that's right. Yeah.
and say, "Oh, somebody's harassing us. The man you had an affair with is harassing us." Even though this guy had moved away across the country at that point.
Mm.
So there was this, several years worth of harassment going on, and then, sometime in the year leading up to her murder, Mark himself had engaged in an affair with somebody. And so that there was a second prong of the prosecution's accusations that, well, he wanted to get his wife out of the way so that he could then move on with his life and his new, his affair girlfriend. So
Wow.
that's how they framed it was an affair and he needed to get rid of his wife.
Yeah, most homicides, A, it's somebody that you know, and B, follow the money, follow the jealousy, follow like a
Yep.
crime of passion, or they're pissed off about X, Y, or Z, and yeah,
Yeah.
romance, and it drives people to kill people. There's no doubt about that. So
Yep.
that would be the motive. Was there any surprises, if any, from the witness testimony or presentation of evidence during the trial for you?
So probably the biggest surprise, right? Because a lot of the testimony, back that up, right? The testimony of the officers, the evidence of the affair, right? Like I said, the prosecution had a good packet of evidence. But one of the things that came out, and it really, I don't know that it had much to do with the actual crime, but Mark Jensen had this fascination with the male member, the male appendage, to the point that
Okay.
he had a collection of photos on his hard drive, all categorized into different folders
Oh boy.
that a witness or a friend, a coworker of his, went looking for a phone number one day on his desk at work and flipped open a pad to see a bunch of drawings, pencil drawings of male appendages. And then he would, quiz and grill his affair girlfriend about, past boyfriends and what they were like. So that was probably the thing that surprised us the most, is just this fascination of his with that. All right. And again, I don't know that how much that had to do with the actual case, but
Right.
it came out as part of the evidence.
Wow, that's so weird. You just don't know. It's like Julie, his wife, they met, I think they were both fairly young,
Yep.
and she wound up being a stay-at-home mom, and he was very demeaning to her, and he'd make snarky comments about stay-at-home moms, they're useless and this and that, and you know they're presenting all that evidence. To me, it'd be like it's just even more reasons for a juror to dislike this guy.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's probably the hard part is, even you set aside the murder aspect of it, which I think we can all firmly agree is kind of a character deficit. But you set aside that, and he just wasn't a very likable guy, right?
No.
He's kind of a dickhead to her, right? The
Yes.
the the testimony that we got from neighbors, and like you said, how he spoke to her, about her, and around her, it's like, man, the guy was just a jag-off in general.
Yeah, just yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like, and I'm looking at photos of the two of them, and I'm thinking to myself, which one of these things don't belong? She looked like a sweetheart. She just looked like a nice person, and he, like you said, he looked like a douchebag. This guy
Yep.
is a dick.
Yep.
But who's fascinated with dicks? But whatever. I don't get it, but
Right.
whatever.
Pardon the pun, but he was a dickhead.
Exactly. So, what was your impression of the defense attorney and the judge?
Oh, I think you cut out there for a second.
Yeah, just for a second. So, what was your impression of the defense attorney and the judge?
Let's start with the judge. I thought very, very fair, right? He both laid into and allowed a lot from the attorneys. In other words, you couldn't tell. He wasn't favoring anybody, which is the way it should be,
That's
right?
their job.
He would admonish both of them for certain things when they stepped out of line. So that was good. Um, thought that he's a very good judge to preside over that. The defense attorneys, I thought, I mean, again, I'm not an expert. They just seem kind of weak to me in terms of not only the case that they were handed, but also just the way they worked through the evidence, the way they countered
Mhm.
with the witnesses. I just don't think if their defense was that she was depressed and committed suicide, to me, they didn't seem to do a very good job of kind of honing in on that message. They go in and try and counteract what evidence or testimony was provided, but didn't really redirect it towards the whole depression, the question of depression in her
Okay,
part. They're not really until the end. And so I think that, like I said, they had an uphill climb and just didn't have a lot to work with.
gotcha. Now, did Mark and Julie had children, right?
Yeah, I think they had two boys, if I
Okay.
remember
Did any
correctly.
of them testify?
One of them did. He came up to the stand.
Really? How old was
Yep,
he?
he testified. I think he's in his 30s. now, so he's
Oh,
off living on his own. I believe he was married, if I remember correctly, and has a career, and he's still local to the area.
okay.
And he had testified, on behalf of the defense, on behalf of his father. Um,
Okay.
and it was, I guess, for lack of anything else, kind of heartbreaking to think
Yeah.
about. I mean, he's a grown man now, but you think about it, at the time, he was whatever, 8 or something. I mean, he's a
Oh,
young kid, elementary age kid,
yeah.
and having to find this, having to see your mom that way when, dad picks you up and brings you home from school. It's kind of heartbreaking to think about, and just the who knows what type of damage or trauma was instilled
Oh
in
my
him.
God. Yeah.
But
Do you know
yeah,
who took over for the parents? Because obviously mom is gone and dad is gone in prison. So who raised the kids? Do you know?
that I don't know. We never got into that.
Yeah, I tried to find that and I could not find that. Maybe like a grandparent or, you
Yeah, I
try to
know
get a
his.
blood relative, but it's not always so
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, I know they have relatives on both sides, local in the area, but I don't
Mm,
know if anybody took him in.
man, that's God, that's terrible. So, what
Yeah.
was your impression of the detectives or cops that testified? Any surprises
Um,
there?
Not really. One of the longest testimony from a cop that we had to view was recorded. He's like the
Mm,
on-scene answering cop. And I mean, it was fine. Like I said, it was recording. That was tough to watch. But the
yeah.
detective that took the lead, was still around. He'd retired, but he's still in the area. So he came back and he testified over the
Wait.
course of several days, several different times.
Oh, okay.
And I was actually very impressed with him. I mean, this big beef of a guy,
Mhm.
but very well spoken, very modulated in his tones. I mean, I don't think the defense could have ruffled him if they tried. I mean, I know they were trying at points, get him off his
Sure.
beat. I mean, you probably aware of this, right? Their job is to unsettle you
Yep.
and catch you.
Absolutely.
And he was very controlled, very impressed. And I'm thinking, if I'm a prosecutor, this is the type of detective I want on the stand, on my behalf, right?
Right.
Because I thought he was very, very good.
Now, the crime occurred in Pleasant Prairie, correct? Or was it in
Correct.
Kenosha? It was
Pleasant
in Pleasant Prairie, Kenosha
Prairie, yeah,
County.
which is just connected to Kenosha, and yeah, it's part of Kenosha County.
Yeah. So they don't get a lot of homicides in Pleasant Prairie.
They don't have a big staff or big force
No.
on that. They don't have a lot of homicides coming through. So I don't know how many he had done before this, but
Well,
seemed
good on
to,
them. Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Because, if you don't get your reps in, it's like anything else. You
Mm-hmm.
don't get as good. Like in Milwaukee, unfortunately, we have lots of reps when it comes to homicide. It's
Right.
it's a well-oiled machine. And sometimes like smaller departments, it happens once every 50 years where,
Yep.
it's kind of all hands on deck and, it's something foreign to them. It's not something that they deal with all the time. But there's
I
some
remember
pros and
chatting.
cons.
Right. I remember chatting back in the jury room, and a couple of people were like, "Well, the detective didn't do this. He should have done that." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but we're looking back over 20 years now. It's easy to look back and say, well, he should have done this because this is the type of evidence we needed. But if they don't have a lot come through, and he's pulling what he thinks is important to the case, and you can't look back 20 years later and say, oh, he missed all this stuff, right? It just doesn't work that way.
Oh yeah. So how long did this trial go?
It went the entire month of January. We
Okay.
delivered a verdict, I believe, on February 1st.
So how
So
long did you guys deliberate? How long did it take you to come up with the guilty?
we deliberated over the course of 2 days. So probably the afternoon of the first day of deliberations, after we got through closing arguments and the judge gave us our instructions. We deliberated for a few hours in the afternoon, and then the bailiff said, "It's 5 o'clock. Judge has got to go. Everybody go home. See you tomorrow." And then we came back the next day
Okay.
and probably had another few hours of deliberation then. So I would bet there's like 6 to 7 hours worth of deliberation that we went
Okay.
through across 2 days.
So, you all have to be on the same sheet of music with the verdict. Did
Yes.
that change as time went by, or was pretty much everybody kind of in the same lane, you know, as the trial went on? There was no big like aha moments, that kind of thing.
It seemed like everybody was pretty much in the same lane, but on the first day of deliberation, we decided to kick it off with a vote. All right, everybody, write down guilty or not guilty on a slip of paper, crumple it up, throw it in this hat here, and we'll see where
Yeah.
we stand. Right. So there's 12 of us. We throw everything in, and 4 people had written down not guilty.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So 8 of us guilty, 4 not guilty. But they had also clarified too. It's like it wasn't that they thought he was innocent or that Julie actually committed suicide. It was, do we have enough evidence
Yeah.
to say he's guilty, right? So there's that fine kind of gradation, that fine difference there. Um, but, because there was no actual evidence that ever showed him serving her antifreeze, right? No fingerprints on a couple of antifreeze, no video of him there.
Right.
It's
And
all, at
he
that point,
didn't
it's all
admit to any of
circumstantial.
this, right? He didn't
He didn't
confess.
admit, right? He didn't admit to any of it. So it's all stitching together
Sure.
activities, events, and the
That's tough.
evidence. And
Yeah.
so those four people are like, we just don't know if there's enough there for us to say guilty right off the bat. So
All
that's
right.
where we started.
So then what do you do after that? You do your vote. There's 4 people out of 12 that are,
Yep.
saying innocent. So do you just mull over all the fine points of the trial, all the evidence and statements and all that?
So I think really the first day after we got the vote was we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, what evidence are we really going to use, right? We have all these witnesses, right? 80 some odd witnesses, and a lot of us had differing opinions on the witnesses, whether they
Sure.
were good or bad witnesses, whether they gave
Right.
good testimony or undercut the opposite side. And then we had a lot of this, the more physical evidence, right? The pictures that we saw, the digital evidence, the email communications that he had with his affair girlfriend talking about, hinting at things like this, the online searches that were captured from his hard drive when he's looking up things like poisoning, antifreeze poisoning, things like that. And so we spent probably, a good chunk of the time up front kind of in that administrative piece, trying to figure
Okay.
out how we're going to do this. Then we all left, and nobody slept that night, including
Oh,
me.
wow.
Came
Okay.
back just ragged the next morning and ended up narrowing it down to say, okay, here are 6 key pieces of evidence,
Sure.
right? These are, irrefutable. Right? You can't have an opinion on whether this evidence is true or not, like a witness, because it's right there in front of you.
Right.
And so, as people were bringing up different, scenarios or objections or counterpoints, you know, I would literally just point back and say, all right, does that change any one of these 6 pieces of evidence? Right?
Mm.
Does that, what you're saying, does that back up against what we're seeing here for the evidence that we agreed is, irrefutable? And that's really how we kind of deliberated our way through it, was using that as our gut check.
How many times did you cast a vote? You did like right away, and then after,
And not again until the end.
not till the end. Okay.
Yep.
When did you
So
know it was the end?
a couple people had come around and said, yeah, you know what? Oh, you're right. I would change my vote now.
Okay.
I vote guilty. And there was a couple, like 2 leftovers, and they were kind of, I won't say throwing up objections, but throwing more, what ifs. What if this
Sure.
happened? What if that?
And it has to be
And
beyond a reasonable doubt. So, that's a
correct.
high threshold. I get it.
It is high. It's all 12 of us, right? Not one
Yep.
person can say, not guilty. Otherwise, it's all over.
Yep.
And finally, one of the people that had voted not guilty originally, she kind of nudges me and she says, "I think you should take another vote now." I'm like, "All right, let's try that." And so it was, whatever later morning of the second day. So we took another vote, and it was unanimous at that point.
Okay. Well, that must have been a relief for you, that's for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things that I kept repeating to them that I wanted to make sure we all understood is, regardless of what our vote is, we have to be able to defend it. In other words, you have
Yes.
to be able to answer somebody if they ask us, why did you vote that way? And so whether you're voting with your conscience saying, well, this is what I felt, or you're voting saying, yep, all this evidence is what made me vote this way or other, we had to be able to defend it. And so that way, when it was unanimous, you know, we all said, okay, we're all able to defend this unanimous guilty vote.
Now, looking back, did the police ever recover like an antifreeze bottle that was used? Did they have that good of evidence?
And again, this is one of the things where some of the jurors were kind of picking apart the detective's
Hmm.
fidelity to the case because he had walked through the house with a camera, which back in 1998, I don't know that detectives normally videotape crime scenes. Maybe they did or not, but I think,
Yeah, they did, but usually it would be like a CSI person, but with a small department, that's the difference.
and
Like
I
in
think he had
Milwaukee or
mentioned that
in a big
they
department,
weren't
you
used
have
to doing that.
CSI people that's their job. They're going to
Yeah.
videotape, they're going to take, hundreds and hundreds of still pictures.
Yeah. No, in this case, the detective is the one that walked through the house videotaping. And at one point, when he's out in the garage kind of scanning around, you see antifreeze bottles sitting on a shelving unit in the background.
Okay.
So,
So
I
it
mean, who
could have
knows?
been
But
any
no,
one of those.
yeah, there was never a bottle produced as evidence.
Did they say what she mixed it with, or what he mixed it with?
No, there was no definitive evidence if he used just orange juice or
Yeah.
something else. I don't know.
Wow. How long was she sick, or were they able to ascertain that?
Um, well, I think he really, like, I think he's trying to feed her antifreeze in the couple of weeks leading up to it, because there's,
Mm.
testimony that she had said to other friends, like, he was getting me trying to drink wine last night. We don't normally drink wine, and
Ah,
he
okay.
he was chasing me around trying to get me to drink wine. I don't know why. So I think in the last few days, is when he really started lacing
Mm.
whatever he was giving her with
Okay.
antifreeze, and then had gotten a prescription for some other things like Ambien or whatever that he's also throwing in there. So he's really throwing a cocktail
Yeah,
into
yeah.
her body, right? Because she wasn't feeling good. And I don't know if she wasn't feeling good just in the normal course of us not feeling good, or if because he was giving her antifreeze and that was making her not feel good. But there was other drugs that he was feeding her to help with, as he told the doctor, she needs help sleeping. She needs a sleeping drug.
Mm.
Her anxiety is bad. She's not feeling better. So
Now,
she ended up getting a number of things ingested.
they didn't arrest him right away, did they?
They did not.
Yeah,
They did
because
not. It
you know,
was it was a couple years, I think.
yeah, because I'm thinking to myself, it's like you're gonna have to put that all together, and the toxicology ordinarily they don't. You have to test for specific things. And that's
Hmm.
not one of the things they're going to test for in a toxicology during an autopsy.
Right. Yeah. I don't remember how they actually led found their way to that. I mean, I know they saw evidence of things that manifest from antifreeze poisoning, like, you get crystals that start forming
Yep.
in your kidneys. That's
Hmm.
one of the things. And so they saw that during the autopsy. And I think they started working backwards from
Mm.
there to say, okay, here's, the cause of death was, poisoning from ethyl, I can't remember the name of
Yeah,
it.
I forget to. Yeah, I was trying to remember
Yeah.
that. Yeah, it's the specific.
But this is the ingredient that causes these crystals to form, right? And we also have evidence of suffocation. And so I think it was really kind of working backwards to say, okay, she was poisoned with this type of ingredient,
Yeah.
which can be found in antifreeze.
Wow. So, as the foreman of the jury, did you have to put out any kind of like fires, or were there some personality conflicts that were really getting out of hand? Or
No,
what?
actually, and that was one of the most interesting parts of this whole experience to me. I mean, besides the process of being involved in a murder trial, was throwing, originally there's 16 of us, right? Four alternate jurors, and then
Mhm.
the 12 who actually get to vote. So throwing 16 strangers into a room, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I mean, that can be incredibly combustible.
Oh yeah, it sure can.
Or in our case, it was interesting how it worked out, right? You've seen the movie The Breakfast Club. Many of us
Yep.
have. And what happened there? Five strangers got thrown together for an entire day and found out that despite their outward differences, they weren't really that different after all. That was our experience over the course of
Wow.
a month, right? People had different, we had different personalities, different opinions, but there weren't any real outliers. There wasn't this, the one aggressive dude that was yelling at everybody else,
Right,
or
right.
the people shutting down because they didn't want to participate. I mean, we're all engaged and we're all interacting with each other. And I think it's fair to say we came out of this, with a lot stronger ties to each other. I mean, we all remained in contact afterwards. We've actually gotten together a couple of times,
Okay.
one for a formal 1 year reunion earlier this year. But
Okay.
in, just, kind of offshoots, people getting together here and there. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it formed some interesting bonds.
I don't doubt that. So the verdict was guilty, and the judge sentenced him to life with no chance of parole. Do you think that was
Correct.
fair?
I do. I think that's fair. I think that's what the guidance called for, if I remember hearing the judge
Yeah.
during sentences. But I think it's absolutely fair based on just what we saw from evidence, the way he behaved, the actions that he took. I think, yeah, absolutely, that's fair.
Yeah, I think it was an extraordinarily cruel and calculated crime.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
why it's first degree intentional homicide. It's not the same as, say, he walked in and his wife was, like in bed with some guy. They get into a tussle and he
Right.
winds up killing her or him. I mean, it's still a homicide, but
Right.
he's not, calculating this for weeks or years or whatever, that's pretty diabolical.
Yeah, when you talk about, somebody who is better to have off the streets because they pose a
Right.
danger, that to me is him because he did it once, he calculated it once. I mean, what happens the next time that his relationship isn't working right?
And he was extra creepy looking. Yeah, he looked like a creepy guy. So.
That's right. Exactly.
Now, did this experience give you any nightmares?
It really didn't.
Okay,
There were no nightmares to come. I don't even know if I even had any dreams about it, right? I may have, but no,
interesting.
for the most part, it was pretty analytical to me.
Wow. Because, it's unusual to see, a murder victim. Because I'm
Hmm.
sure you saw all kinds of pictures or video. Did they show any autopsy pictures?
Yes, there were some, and yeah, that was a bit gruesome. I tell you what, the most shocking part was early on. I think it might have been the first day of testimony, right? They're talking to witnesses. They hadn't presented any visual testimony so far. But then he's like, all right, well, now we have some, photos to show you. And the first photo that pops up is her face up close to the screen, with the pillow or head lifted off the pillow.
Yeah.
Eyes are lifeless, nose is pushed aside. And it was like, dude, a little warning because there were a couple of us in the jury like, oh crap, all right?
Yeah.
It just popped up. He didn't tell us that, all right, we're gonna now see a picture of Julie
Oh,
as
okay.
she was found dead. He just sort of, let's pop it up there and go. And maybe that
Yes.
was intentional for the shock value.
I
It wouldn't
think it
surprise
is.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if it was, it worked because my first thought was, wow.
Well, they want you to be shocked. They want you to
Yes.
be like aghast by this.
Yep.
That's a part of the shtick.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else you want to share with us about the trial or this experience?
Um, Other than I think, we hear about jury duty being, your civic responsibility to do, and I do truly believe that even more so now, having gone through it, right? I think it is something that everybody needs to participate in at some point, just to understand kind of how the judicial system works, what it's like when you actually get accused of a crime, and just to, be able to have to weigh, heavier things in life. Normally, you don't go through the day thinking, "Oh, I've got the fate of a man
Yeah.
in my
That's
hands,"
huge.
right?
Yeah.
You go through the day worrying about, do I have enough gas in my car? I got to do this at work. I'm
Right.
behind on, yada yada. It really puts things in perspective. So I think it's absolutely a civic duty that people should do.
Excellent. So, let's switch gears here a little bit. You
Hmm.
know, you wrote a book called The Breakfast Jury. Where
Yep.
did the idea and when did it start like coming to fruition?
So, I've written other books, and
Right.
when some of the jury members found out that I was an author, this is like a week or two into it. Oh, you should write a book about this. You should write a book about this. My first thought was, well, I don't write nonfiction. All my books have been works of fiction.
Hmm.
And the other thing I thought, I was like, well, and plus, jury tell-all books have been done to death, right? Every time you have a big, high-profile trial, a book or two comes out afterwards about their
Sure.
experience, right? And those are not that uncommon. So I wasn't really giving it any thought. But then a couple weeks into it, the whole Breakfast Club aspect of what was going on, that development I started noticing that. And like I said, I was pretty analytical throughout this whole thing. I spent a lot of time watching and listening and paying
Yeah.
attention to other people, and I realized, holy crap, we've got kind of a Breakfast Club situation. And that's where the seed of the book idea landed. I'm like, all right, I'm going to write a book, and it's not going to be this tell-all. It's going to be a fictionalized version of what we went through about how a jury, you know, essentially starts out as strangers and comes out as something much more different on the other side. And so the book is really told in two plots. And so the first plot is the jury's experience, going
Hmm.
through this trial and adjudicating the case at the end. And a lot of that, a lot of the information that feeds that plot is what it came directly from the trial.
Sure.
There were even things that I
How
just
could it
quoted
not? Yeah.
straight off. Right. I had all the material I needed right there.
Sure.
I changed the names of everybody. I may have combined some witnesses together, for brevity, or created a witness that I needed to fill a certain role.
Sure.
But essentially the evidence and the statements that were made came straight from the trial. The second plot of the book takes place a year later when the jury reunites, to celebrate their verdict, and they end up being poisoned with what looks suspiciously like antifreeze. And so now you've got this kind of this detective or private investigator aspect going on. He's got to figure out what happened, right? Who are all these people? How do they come together? And who's who's seeking revenge? If is somebody seeking revenge because they voted, the guy guilty a year ago, or how do they end up poisoning? So that kind of gives it that murder mystery aspect.
Right. Oh, that's great. So, you've written 8 books before this book.
Hmm.
How did this project differ as far as like the technical stuff? I mean, did you do anything differently, or was this just like another book?
Um, it ended up kind of being another book, right? I mean,
Okay.
I have a trilogy of middle grade books for 11-year-old readers, and so that's complete fantasy, right? You can make up
Sure.
stuff whatever you want at that point. And I had a trilogy of murder thrillers that I had done, and I'd done a lot of research back then, on how things are done, how things are investigated. This is where I said I could have really used your manuals 10 years ago. Um, and so what I did is I reused one of the characters from that trilogy as the lead investigator for this book.
Okay.
Um, but for the most part, a lot of my material is already given to me from the trial itself. So now it's just crafting a plot line, crafting the seeds of a mystery to make it into a book.
Okay.
So the worst part was I had promised all my fellow jurors, I said, 1 year from now, from the day we deliver the verdict, we're going to reunite. I'm going to have a signed copy for all of you.
Oh boy.
So I walked out
Pressure's
of that
on.
trial already on the clock. So I had roughly about 10 months to write it, get it out there, get it published and finished and in their hands. So that part was a little tense, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's
70,000
daunting.
words in 10 months as a polished project can be a bit of a slog.
Yeah, sure can. So, going way back, when did you begin your writing career and why?
Um, like a lot of people, like a lot of writers and authors, I wrote when I was younger. You write stories. I actually wrote a couple of manuscripts back in the 90s that I really didn't do anything with.
Okay.
But in 2014, I was in a parent-teacher conference for my fourth grade son at the time, and the teacher said, "Yeah, he's a good reader, but there's nothing really good out there for 11-year-old boys to read."
Hmm.
And that just struck me. I remember thinking, really? Is that true? I didn't know that. I didn't know if that's true or not. And by the time the conference was over, I already had the seed of a novel in my head
Oh,
that
okay.
became the first one I wrote and published. So teachers out there, if you think your words don't matter, think again. They can spread farther than you know.
Okay. Now, are you self-published or do you have a agent and a publisher or how does that work?
I am independently published. I actually started my own publishing imprint, so I publish all my books under that.
Okay.
So
What's
I
what's the
went
name
the
of that?
self-pub. I'm sorry?
What's the name of your imprint?
It's Wheatland House Publishing.
Okay.
And so I release all my books under that. But, for categorization's sakes, yes, I'm self-published.
Okay, excellent. So, what is your writing routine? Are you wake up at the crack of dawn, or are you burning the
Yep.
midnight oil, or what does it look like?
No, when I'm in the thick of a book, I'm pretty structured. I write early, and I think better early. So I generally by 6:30 I want to be, pounding away at the keyboard.
Mm,
Because by the time late morning comes around, I've kind of burned the juices and I'm
okay.
off in the afternoon to other stuff. So I write early in the morning and I'm not really a word count guy, but I do kind of backhandedly keep it in my
Okay.
mind that let's try and do between 500 and 1,000 words every day.
Yeah, that's
Um,
that's a good goal.
yep. And what I'll generally do is, I will edit what I'd written the previous day. Like I'll go back
Mm.
a couple pages on what I'd written and I'll go through and I end up editing, but what it really is just something to kind of re-trigger,
Yeah, you're
restart the
getting
engine.
back into the zone. Yeah.
Right, right. So you kind of pick up where you left off, kind of edit and go through, but now you got the juices going again. You start over, right? Or you
Okay.
start where you left off.
Right. So, any special software or music while you write?
There's always music, nothing really specific. A lot of classic rock, hard rock. It doesn't matter. I just need some background music going on.
Okay.
And then I've used a number of different tools. I've used like, Scrivener. I have a Scrivener thing, but
Hmm.
like you found, and I think many people find, it's very comprehensive, and there's so much I'm not using that
Yeah. Oh
it's
yeah.
not as
There's so many
useful to
bells
me.
and whistles to that thing. Holy cow.
Yep. I've used things like writer.com, which is an online, writing platform, or Writer, which is very similar.
Mm.
This last book, I used what you have used, which is
Yeah.
plotter.com, which was very handy to me because I'm running two different timelines in the book, so I needed a
Ooh.
way to visually intercut between the two
Yep.
timelines because the book does jump back and forth, so I needed a way to keep that organized. And that came in
Perfect.
very handy. But ultimately, they all end up in Word for that final draft. I mean,
Yep.
that's where I really assemble the final cut is in Word.
Excellent. So you co-host a podcast called the Midwest Writers Room Podcast, and
Yes,
that's with the Wisconsin Writers Association President Luella Schmidt,
correct.
which I was honored to be a guest. I think you got a great show. How did that happen? How did that come to fruition?
So first off, yes, you were a great guest, and yes, we're going to have you back at some point because you
Awesome.
were
I'd be
just that
happy to.
good. So Wisconsin Writers Association is a nonprofit that exists to kind of help writers develop their craft, right? Increase their chances of publication or whatever their writing goals are, and to network amongst other writers. And, I'd started as the operations director for this group back in 2022.
Okay.
And it was brought up during a board meeting at one point. It's like, yeah, we should try and do a podcast, right? And, it didn't really get much traction at that point, but then Luella and I started talking more about it and kind of put together I guess, a more cohesive, comprehensive plan of
Mm.
here's what the podcast will do, here's what it's going to be about, here's how we'll do it, right? So it went from this initial idea, 6 months earlier, to a plan that we put together and then launched late in 2023. And it really is to kind of further the Wisconsin Writers Association mission of bringing on authors, talking about how do they write? How do they come up with their story
Sure.
ideas, right? How do they get published? Bringing in industry professionals like agents or editors or publishing agents to say, what should writers look for? How can they increase their chances of success in getting their books published? And so it's become a bi-weekly podcast that we put out, and it's been a blast so far. I mean, we get to meet great guests like you. I never probably would have run across you otherwise if it wasn't for this
Yeah,
podcast.
probably not. Probably not. So, I, piggybacking on your podcast, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that you always ask. So now the
Hmm.
tables have turned. What's your special sauce? Something that not too many people know about you.
So my special sauce, my favorite job that I ever did growing up was catching shoplifters.
Oh,
I caught
really?
I caught shoplifters for 7 years when I was in college and for a couple years afterwards for companies like Kmart, Shopko, Dayton Hudson Company. And, it's a young man's game, certainly.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this is back in the 90s when, you still had the ability to, stop people for shoplifting. Nowadays, company policies,
Yeah, they
the
want hands
culture
off.
shifted so much, they just
Right.
let them go. But back then, oh, hell no.
Oh, yeah, you
It was
chased them
the
down,
Wild
right?
West. Oh, we were out tackling people in the parking lot if they
Oh,
ran, recovering hundreds of, hundreds of dollars worth of merchandise because they pushed it in a cart right out the door. I mean, I busted up my kneecap one time when I tackled a guy and hit the
oh,
ground
wow.
wrong. Spent 6 weeks on crutches and managed to catch another shoplifter while I was doing that. That kid felt embarrassed as hell. I got caught by a guy on crutches. But that was probably one of my most favorite jobs that I've ever done because it was just a blast every day.
I'm surprised you didn't go into law enforcement. If you were, I know a lot of cops that started out, being security in department stores or whatever, and they've gone on to like really big stuff.
Yeah. That and that was actually a thought, but I actually went to school for graphic design
Mm.
and English because all in the back of my head is, oh, I'm gonna do video game covers or book covers, and I'm gonna write books at some point in the future, and so that
Okay.
was kind of my guiding light. Um, but yeah, a career in law enforcement did cross my mind a number of occasions, and that was all my experience with the judicial system prior to this was serving as a witness. Whenever somebody contested their charge, I'd get brought in as a witness for the prosecution because I was the
Sure.
one that made that citizen's arrest.
Wow. That's awesome. I did not. That's great. I love that. That's a good question because you never know what somebody's going to say. So let's end on a positive note. Do you have something cool that you want to share with us? It doesn't have to be about writing. Again, I'm flipping the microphone on you here.
Yep. And so this sounds really snotty and dumb, but I like cars. I like to collect cars.
Hmm.
And right now, I'm sitting on a collection of six different BMWs, all of which are black except for one gray one.
Okay.
And I mean, it's just stupid because nobody needs that many cars, and these are all used or older ones that I kind of fix up and would eventually sell. But I like being able to walk out and say, all right, what do I feel like driving today? Do I want a rumble of a V8? Do I want to hammer a high-end turbo and just leave a cloud of smoke behind me? And so I probably know more about fixing German cars than anybody rightfully needs to know because that's all you do with German cars is fix them. The
Yes.
thing is, if your BMW is not leaking, that means it's out of oil. You should probably add some. It's an old adage we say quite often.
That's awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this up here. Where can people go to find out more about you and your books?
So the best place, the launching point to find out about me is to go to my site, kenhumphrey.com. That's last name spelled Humprey. From there, you can just get links, you follow links to all my books on purchase sites. They're all available in the online places that you normally get them, specifically Amazon, in both physical and ebook format.
All right. Well, I will put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ken.
Hey, thanks for having me, Patrick. Always great to talk to you.